I never expected to hear from my parents again, not after what they did. But life has a way of dragging ghosts from the past, no matter how deeply you try to bury them. I should start from the beginning. My name is Evelyn, and I haven't spoken to my family in nearly a decade. It wasn't a petty falling out or a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate choice, a survival mechanism. When I was 18, they made it clear where I stood in their world, and I made the only decision that made sense. Growing up, my younger brother, Sean, was the sun around which my parents revolved. He was their golden child, the one they poured their love, attention, and, most importantly, money into. If Sean wanted something, he got it. It didn't matter if I needed braces or books for school. Sean's soccer camp, Sean's music lessons, Sean's emergencies always came first. I wasn't bitter, not at first. I was a quiet kid, a straight-A student who planned her escape through scholarships and hard work. I didn't need much from them, just the college fund my grandmother had set aside for me. It was my safety net, my way out. Then, a month before I was set to leave for university, I came home to find my mother sitting at the kitchen table, avoiding my gaze. My father was pacing, his hands stuffed in his pockets. I knew something was wrong before they even spoke. "Evelyn," my mother started, her voice too soft, too careful. "We need to talk about your tuition." My stomach clenched. "What about it?" My father exhaled sharply. "There's no easy way to say this. We had to use it." I stared at them, uncomprehending. "Use it? What do you mean, use it?" "For Sean," my mother said quickly. "He had that opportunity. Remember the training program in Europe? It was a once-in-a-lifetime chance. He needed support, and you took my college fund?" My voice cracked. My hands clenched into fists. My father sighed, as if I was the one being unreasonable. "It was a family decision." "No," I snapped, my pulse pounding in my ears. "It was your decision. I worked my ass off for years. Grandma left that money for me." "She left it for the family," my mother corrected, as if twisting the words could make it true. "You're smart, Evie. You'll find another way." And that was it. No remorse, no apology. Just an expectation that I would nod, accept my fate, and support Sean, just like I always had. I left that night, packed whatever I could fit into a single suitcase, and never looked back. It wasn't easy. I took on student loans, worked 3 part-time jobs, and clawed my way through college. There were nights I went to bed hungry, days when I wondered if I'd made a mistake. But I never turned back, never called home. I made it. I graduated, got a solid job in finance, and built a life far away from them. I married Logan, a man who actually saw me, not as a second choice, not as an afterthought, but as a person who mattered. For years, I told myself I was free. Until last December, when my phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in nearly a decade. My mother's voice, hesitant, almost desperate. "Evie, sweetheart, we need you." I should have hung up. I should have let it go to voicemail. But some ghosts don't stay buried. No matter how hard you tried, I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. My mother's voice, too familiar despite the years, sent a cold shiver down my spine. "Evelyn," she repeated when I didn't respond right away. "Are you there?" I could have hung up. I should have. Instead, against every instinct, I found myself saying, "What do you want?" There was a sharp inhale on the other end, like she hadn't expected me to answer, like she wasn't ready for this conversation either. "Sweetheart, it's Christmas soon. No," I cut in. "You don't get to call me sweetheart. Not after everything." A pause, then a sigh, heavy with the kind of exhaustion that used to guilt me into submission. "Not anymore. I know you're still angry," she tried again, "but we want to see you. Your father and I, we miss you." I let out a bitter laugh before I could stop myself. "Oh, you miss me now?" "Evelyn," she said, her tone shifting from forced warmth to something harder, more insistent. "Please, just listen. This isn't just about us. It's about Sean." Of course it was. A twisted part of me almost wanted to hear what ridiculous favor they were about to ask. I stayed silent, waiting. "Sean is struggling," she continued. "You know how hard it's been for him since his injury." "What injury?" I asked flatly. Another pause. You You haven't heard? How would I? I snapped. I haven't heard from any of you in 8 years. More silence. Then, Sean tore his ACL. He can't play anymore. His soccer career is over. I felt nothing. No shock. No sympathy. Nothing. And I could almost hear her flinch at my indifference. And he's in a bad place, Evelyn. He's depressed, lost. He doesn't know what to do with his life now. A beat passed before she added, he needs you. I scoffed. He needs me? The same way he needed my college fund? The same way he needed every ounce of attention and support while I was treated like an afterthought? He's your brother, she said, a touch of desperation creeping into her voice. Family takes care of family. I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. Funny how that only applies when you need something from me. Her voice wobbled. We're not asking for much. Just come home for Christmas. Let's be a family again. Please, Evelyn. I should have said no. I should have cut the call and gone back to my life. But instead, I found myself hesitating. Not because I forgave them. Not because I missed them. But because I wanted to see what game they were playing this time. And, maybe, just maybe, I wanted a little revenge. Logan wasn't thrilled when I told him. You don't owe them anything, Evie, he said, arms crossed as he leaned against the kitchen counter. His face was calm, but I could see the tension in his jaw. You know that, right? I nodded, stirring my coffee absently. I know. Then why are you going? I exhaled slowly, staring at the dark liquid in my mug. Because I need to see it for myself. I need to see them. It wasn't about closure. I didn't believe in that fairy tale nonsense. It was about control. I wanted to look them in the eyes and know, finally, that they had no power over me anymore. Logan studied me for a long moment. Then, finally, he nodded. All right, but I'm coming with you. I smiled faintly. I was hoping you'd say that. 2 days later, we were on a plane heading back to the town I swore I'd never return to. The moment we landed, a familiar weight settled in my chest, a reminder of all the years I spent suffocating here. My parents' house was exactly as I remembered it, too pristine, too staged, as if they were constantly trying to convince the world they were better than they really were. The Christmas lights were excessive, the kind of display meant to outshine the neighbors rather than spread any actual holiday cheer. I hesitated on the doorstep, my stomach twisting in ways I hated. Logan squeezed my hand, grounding me. You're not alone, he murmured. I knocked. A few seconds later, the door swung open, and there she was. My mother. She looked older. Lines around her mouth, gray streaks in the dark brown hair she used to dye religiously. But her expression was the same as it always was when she wanted something. Carefully arranged warmth, like a mask she'd worn so often it had become second nature. Evelyn, she breathed, pressing a hand to her chest as if my presence physically affected her. Oh, sweetheart, you came? I didn't move. I didn't return the fake warmth. Yeah, I'm here. She glanced at Logan, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes, before stepping aside. Come in, come in. It's freezing out. I stepped over the threshold, and the moment I did, I knew. Something was wrong. The house smelled like cinnamon and pine. The fireplace crackled warmly. The Christmas tree twinkled in the corner. On the surface, it was the perfect holiday scene. But there was an energy in the air, thick and heavy. And then I saw him. Sean was slumped on the couch, a bottle of whiskey on the table in front of him. He looked rough, unshaven, gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes. The confident, golden boy aura he once had was gone. When he looked up and saw me, his lips curled into something that was supposed to be a smile but didn't quite reach his eyes. Well, well, he said, his voice hoarse. The prodigal sister returns. And just like that, I knew. They didn't invite me home just for Christmas. They invited me home to fix him. I didn't sit down. I didn't step forward. I just stood there in the doorway, the weight of it all pressing against my chest like a vice. My mother hovered by my side, her hands twisting together like she was about to start wringing them in worry. My father, quieter as always, sat in his usual armchair, watching everything unfold with that same detached discomfort he'd always had whenever conflict arose. And Sean? He just smirked at me over the rim of his whiskey glass, like he was waiting for me to explode. I refused to give him the satisfaction. "Nice to see you too, Sean," I said evenly. "Is it?" he scoffed, setting the glass down a little too hard on the table. "Because it sure took you long enough to come back." Logan stiffened beside me. "She didn't owe you a visit." Sean rolled his eyes, his mouth twisting into something bitter. "Right. Because she's better than all of us now." I let out a slow breath through my nose. "So, let's skip the fake pleasantries. Why am I really here?" My mother flinched, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she placed a hesitant hand on my arm. "Evelyn, please. Just say it." Sean let out a dry chuckle and leaned back against the couch, stretching his arms over the backrest. "They want you to help me, Evie. Fix me. Because you're the responsible one, the one who always figures things out." My mother shot him a sharp look, but he just shrugged. "What? Isn't that the plan?" I stared at him. "And what exactly am I supposed to fix?" "Sean just needs a little support." My mother jumped in quickly. "A chance to rebuild his life. He's been through so much. He was supposed to go pro, Evie, and then the injury. And now what?" I cut in. "He's just given up?" Sean's smirk faltered for the first time. His jaw clenched, and for a second, I saw something raw in his expression. Something real. My father finally spoke. "He just needs some time to get back on his feet. And we thought, since you've done so well for yourself, maybe you could?" I laughed. A short, humorless sound. "Wow, you're actually serious." My mother's face fell. "Evelyn, he's your brother." I turned to Sean. "And what do you want?" He hesitated, just for a second. Then he shrugged again, reaching for his whiskey. "Does it matter?" My stomach twisted. Because that was it, wasn't it? He didn't even want to be saved. He was just here, sinking, and expecting everyone else to flail in after him. I should have turned around and walked out right then and there. Instead, I said, "What exactly do you need from me?" A slow smile spread across my mother's face, like she thought she'd won. "Just some financial support to help him get back on his feet. Maybe let him stay with you for a little while." I almost laughed again. "Oh, absolutely not." The room went still. My mother blinked. "Evelyn, be reasonable." "I am. And my answer is no." I turned to my father. "You have a house. You have money. Why can't you support him?" My father cleared his throat, suddenly interested in the fireplace. "We've had some financial difficulties." Sean let out a harsh laugh. "They mean they blew all their savings trying to keep up appearances. Still trying to live like they're the perfect family even when everything's falling apart." My mother shot him a warning glance, but I saw the flicker of embarrassment cross her face. I shook my head, stepping back toward the door. "I can't believe this. After everything you did to me, you still think I owe you something." "We're not asking for much," my mother insisted. "Just—" "No," I said, more forcefully this time. "I'm not here to clean up your mess. Not this time." Sean watched me with an unreadable expression as I turned to Logan. "We're leaving." But before I could reach the door, my mother's voice turned sharp. "Evelyn, if you walk out that door, don't expect to be welcome back." I froze. Then, slowly, I turned back to her, and I smiled. "I haven't been welcome here in years." Then I opened the door and walked out, leaving them behind. But something told me this wasn't over yet. I should have felt relief as Logan and I drove away from my parents' house, but all I felt was an unsettling weight pressing against my chest. The past was a disease, creeping back in even when I thought I had rid myself of it. Logan didn't speak at first. He knew me well enough to let me sit with my thoughts. But as we reached the edge of town, he finally said, "You okay?" I scoffed, shaking my head. They really thought I'd just roll over and take care of him, like nothing ever happened. Logan kept his eyes on the road. "They don't see you as a person, Evie. You're a resource to them, a tool to use when they're in trouble." I sighed, leaning my head against the cold glass of the window. "I know. I don't know why it still gets to me." He reached over, squeezing my hand. "Because no matter how much you tell yourself you're done, there's always that small part of you that remembers what it felt like to want their approval." I closed my eyes. He was right. But I wasn't that girl anymore. We arrived back at our hotel, a cozy boutique place that Logan had booked as a buffer between us and my parents. I had barely taken off my coat when my phone buzzed. I groaned, already knowing who it was before I even looked. Mom. I ignored it. But a few seconds later, it buzzed again. And again. Logan raised an eyebrow. Persistent. I exhaled sharply and picked up, not bothering with pleasantries. What? Evelyn, we need you to come back. I stiffened. Did you not hear me the first time? I'm not. It's Sean, she interrupted, her voice shaking. He's gone. I felt my stomach drop. What do you mean gone? We don't know where he is, she said frantically. He left after you did. He's not answering his phone, and we found an empty bottle of pills in his room. Logan's eyes snapped to mine. He must have heard through the phone, because his expression darkened. My mother kept rambling, her voice trembling. We called his friends, checked the usual places, but no one's seen him. Evelyn, please. We don't know what to do. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. This could be manipulation. Another desperate attempt to drag me back. But what if it wasn't? I took a slow breath. Did he leave a note? No, she whispered. But his car is still here. He couldn't have gone far. I closed my eyes, cursing under my breath. Logan was already grabbing his coat. He knew what I was about to say before I even said it. Where do you think he'd go? I asked, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be. There was a pause. Then, softly, my mother said, the lake. I didn't waste another second. I hung up and walked out the door, Logan right behind me. If this was another one of their games, I would never forgive them. But if it wasn't, I wasn't sure I'd forgive myself. The lake was just outside town, past the old highway and a winding road lined with skeletal trees. It was a place Sean and I had spent countless summers as kids, skipping stones and daring each other to wade into the freezing water. Back then, it had felt endless, our own hidden world. But now, in the dead of winter, it was nothing but a bleak, frozen stretch. The kind of place where the silence pressed in on you like a weight. Logan gripped the steering wheel tightly, his jaw clenched as he maneuvered through the dark roads. Are you sure this isn't just another manipulation? I swallowed hard. I don't know. I wanted to believe that it was just another attempt to reel me back in, that Sean was sitting in a bar somewhere, throwing back drinks and sulking. But there was something in my mother's voice. Real fear, real desperation. And that scared me more than anything. By the time we reached the lake, my heart was pounding. Logan pulled the car onto the gravel shoulder, headlights cutting through the darkness. The wind howled outside, rattling the branches of the nearby trees. But there was no movement, no sign of Sean. I exhaled, fog spilling from my lips as I stepped out into the bitter air. The ground crunched under my boots as I scanned the shoreline, my stomach twisting. Sean? My voice felt small against the wind. If this is some kind of sick joke, I swear to God. A movement near the docks caught my eye. A figure sat slumped on the edge, barely visible in the dim light. My breath hitched. Sean. He was hunched over, his arms wrapped around himself, staring at the frozen lake like he was waiting for it to swallow him whole. I hesitated, then took a step forward. Sean? He didn't respond. Logan moved beside me, his presence steady, solid. Be careful, he murmured. I took another step, my boots slipping slightly on the frost-covered wood of the dock. When I was close enough, I could see him more clearly. His face gaunt, his eyes red-rimmed, his breath visible in shaky puffs of air. A near-empty bottle of whiskey sat beside him. A prescription pill bottle lay in the snow, the cap off. My chest tightened. I crouched down beside him, forcing my voice to stay even. What are you doing, Sean? For a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. But then, slowly, he turned his head to look at me. You left, he murmured, his voice hoarse. And I realized, there's no one left to fix me. A sharp pang shot through me, anger and sorrow tangled together in a way I couldn't unravel. It was never my job to fix you, Sean. He let out a bitter laugh, his gaze flicking back to the ice. Yeah, I'm starting to figure that out. The silence stretched between us, heavy and fragile. Then, almost too softly to hear, he said, I don't know how to be anything else, Evie. Without soccer, without them telling me what to do, who to be. I don't know what's left of me. I swallowed past the lump in my throat. You're not going to find that answer at the bottom of a bottle, Sean. His hands trembled as he rubbed them together for warmth. Then where? I hesitated, then reached out, prying the whiskey bottle from his grip and tossing it into the snow. He didn't fight me. Come on, I said, standing up. Let's go. Sean stared at me like he didn't quite believe it. Where? He asked, voice barely above a whisper. I looked at Logan, then back at Sean. And for the first time in years, I said, home. Sean barely spoke on the drive back. He sat in the back seat, slumped against the window, watching the darkened landscape slip by in silence. Every now and then, I caught his reflection in the rearview mirror. His face pale, hollowed out by exhaustion, by whatever storm had been brewing inside him for God knows how long. Logan didn't say much either. He kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting on my knee, grounding me. He knew this wasn't over. When we pulled up to my parents' house, the porch light was on, the front door slightly ajar. My mother must have been waiting, because the second Sean stepped out of the car, she rushed outside, arms wrapping around him as if she could pull him back into the version of himself he used to be. Oh, thank God, she breathed, clutching his face between her hands. Sean, you scared me half to death. Sean didn't react. He just stood there, his shoulders hunched, letting her fuss over him like a child. I crossed my arms. You should have called the police if you were that worried. My mother shot me a look, but before she could respond, my father stepped onto the porch. His face was unreadable, but there was something behind his eyes, something cautious. You found him, he said, his gaze flickering to me. Thank you. I stiffened at the words, at the unspoken weight behind them. They had expected me to come back. They knew, deep down, that I wouldn't be able to turn my back completely. That realization made my stomach twist. Sean pulled away from my mother, rubbing a hand down his face. I need to sleep. My mother nodded quickly, guiding him inside. As he disappeared into the house, she turned back to me, her expression unreadable. You should come in, Evelyn. It's late. I shook my head. No, we're leaving. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to argue, but she must have seen something in my face because she sighed instead. Will you at least stay for Christmas dinner? Logan exhaled beside me. We really should be going. But I wasn't looking at him. I was looking at my mother, at the carefully composed face she wore when she was trying to negotiate, to manipulate. Christmas dinner. One meal. I knew what this was. A final attempt to pull me back into their world. And yet, against my better judgment, I found myself saying, fine. Logan turned to me, brow furrowed. But I didn't look at him. One dinner. That was all. I could handle that. Couldn't I? Christmas dinner at my parents' house felt like stepping into an old, familiar nightmare. One where every detail looked perfect on the surface, but the tension underneath could suffocate you. The dining room was just as I remembered it. The long mahogany table set with their best china, candles flickering along the centerpiece. The kind of festive elegance meant to impress rather than comfort. But no amount of decoration could hide the cracks in this family. Sean sat at the end of the table, silent, barely touching his food. My mother, ever the hostess, kept up a steady stream of conversation, pretending like the events of last night hadn't happened. My father focused on his wine, only speaking when absolutely necessary. Logan, beside me, was polite but watchful, his hand resting lightly on my knee under the table. A reminder that I wasn't alone in this. I should have eaten, but my stomach was in knots. So, Evelyn, my mother said suddenly, her voice overly bright, how's work? You must be doing well. I stabbed at my roasted potatoes with my fork. I am. She nodded approvingly, as if she had anything to do with my success. We always knew you'd land on your feet. I didn't bother responding. Sean let out a short, humorless laugh. Yeah, she landed on her feet because she had to, not because anyone helped her. A beat of silence. My mother stiffened, and my father sighed heavily. Sean, let's not start. Why not? Sean leaned back in his chair, swirling his untouched glass of whiskey. His eyes flickered to me, something sharp behind them. Isn't that why she's here? To fix things? I gripped my fork tighter. I came to make sure you weren't dead. He flinched, just barely. You always had it so easy, I continued, unable to stop the words from spilling out. Everything handed to you, everything sacrificed for you, and you still threw it all away. And now you expect me to clean up the mess? I didn't ask you to come, Sean shot back. I didn't ask for anything. My mother cut in sharply. That's enough. It's Christmas. I let out a breath, trying to steady myself. You don't get to act like this is normal. You don't get to pretend like you didn't call me after 8 years because you needed something. My father finally looked up, his gaze heavy. We're a family, Evelyn. Families help each other. I scoffed. Really? That's interesting, because when I needed help, you told me to figure it out on my own. My mother opened her mouth, but I held up a hand. No, you don't get to rewrite history. You stole my college fund. You abandoned me the second I wasn't useful to you. And now, because Sean has finally faced a single consequence in his life, I'm supposed to swoop in and save him? A thick silence filled the room. Sean set his glass down with a hollow clink. I didn't ask for this, he muttered. No, but you expected it, I said, my voice cold. You always have. Something flickered in his face. Something raw, something almost like shame. My mother folded her napkin carefully, her movements tight. If you're not going to be part of this family, then maybe you shouldn't have come. I let out a breathy laugh. You know what? Maybe you're right. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping against the hardwood floor. Logan stood immediately, placing a hand on my back as I turned toward the door. But before I reached it, Sean spoke. I'm sorry. It was barely above a whisper, but it stopped me in my tracks. I turned back, my heart hammering in my chest. What? His jaw tightened. He looked at the table, at his hands, anywhere but at me. I said I'm sorry. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. And then, without another word, I walked out of the house. The cold night air hit me like a slap, but I welcomed it. It felt real, sharper, cleaner than the suffocating weight of that house. Logan was right beside me, his presence steady as we walked toward the car in silence. I should have felt triumphant. I had said my piece. I had left on my own terms. But Sean's words lingered in my mind, an echo I couldn't shake. I'm sorry. 2 words I had never expected to hear from him. 2 words that came far too late. Logan unlocked the car, but instead of getting in, I leaned against the hood, staring up at the sky. The stars were barely visible through the haze of streetlights, but I searched for them anyway, as if they might hold some kind of answer. Logan watched me for a long moment before speaking. That was a lot. I let out a humorless laugh. Yeah, just a little. He leaned beside me, his shoulder brushing mine. You okay? I didn't answer right away. I wasn't sure I knew the answer. For so many years, I had carried the weight of my family's choices, their betrayals. I had told myself I didn't care, that I was stronger without them. And maybe that was true. But Sean's apology had cracked something in me. I exhaled, rubbing a hand over my face. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. Logan tilted his head, considering me. Maybe you don't have to figure it out right now. I swallowed hard. I spent so long hating him, hating them. And now... He waited. I sighed. Now I just feel tired. Logan nodded, his gaze soft. That makes sense. We stood there for a while, the cold air wrapping around us, the night stretching quiet and endless. And then, just as I was about to finally get in the car, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. Sean. For a moment, I debated ignoring it, letting it go unanswered, just like I had for years. But then, without quite knowing why, I picked up. His voice was hoarse. Evie. I didn't respond. A pause. Then quieter. I don't know how to fix this. Something in my chest twisted. I took a slow breath. Then it's time to start trying. And for the first time in a long, long time, I let the door crack open. Sean didn't say much after that. Just a quiet, okay, like he wasn't sure what came next. And honestly, neither was I. I didn't tell him I forgave him. Because I didn't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But something had shifted, and I wasn't ready to slam the door shut again. Logan and I left town the next morning. My parents didn't call, didn't try to make one last plea for reconciliation. I wasn't surprised. They had always been the type to move on, to pretend things weren't broken as long as no one was looking directly at the cracks. But Sean was different. A week passed before he texted me. A simple message: I started therapy. I stared at the screen for a long time, unsure what to feel. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't an apology wrapped in excuses. It was just a step, a real one. I typed back, "Good." A month later, another text: "I got a job. It's nothing big, just helping out at a community center. But I like it." Another step. And then, one day, a picture. It was of the lake, the same frozen expanse where I had found him that night. But this time, there were footprints in the snow, a trail leading away from the ice. His message read, "I think I'm finally moving forward." And for the first time in years, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, we both were.